I am the land that listens. I am the land that broods, steeped in eternal beauty, crystalline waters and woods. The words of Robert Service are as compelling today as when the poet first trod the untamed frontier of the Yukon at the turn of the century. A country of sophisticated cities and magnificent wilderness, Canada spans the vast northern expanses of the North American continent, from the Atlantic to the Pacific, from the farthest reaches of the Arctic to its southern border with the United States. The mix of cultures that constitutes Canada ranges from the First Peoples to the descendants of the French voyageurs to the British, Chinese, and Ukrainians. Canada is not a melting pot, but rather a rich cultural stew. Each culture has retained its own character and flavor, while contributing its essence to what it means to be Canadian. Canada is home to fewer people than live in the state of California. Yet in this vast land, 80% of all Canadians live within 100 miles of the U.S. border. In contrast, the northern and Arctic regions are virtually unpopulated. They are home to the polar bear, the caribou, and to one of the world's best-known symbols of wildlife preservation, the baby harp seal. The second largest country in the world, Canada encompasses nearly 4 million square miles of territory. The region known as Atlantic Canada includes the provinces of New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, and a small and very beautiful island called Prince Edward Island. First successfully colonized by the descendants of those who walked over the ancient land bridge across the Bering Strait from Asia, the nomads simply refer to themselves as the people. They include the Inuit and members of such powerful nations as the Iroquois, Athapascan, and Haida families. On the eastern side of the continent, Leif Erikson explored the coastline of Baffin Island, Labrador, and Newfoundland. Sailing their high-prowed vessels across the seas of the North Atlantic, the Vikings were the first Europeans to reach North America. In Newfoundland, the Norsemen landed and built large sod and wood houses. There they forged iron, hunted, and trapped. According to the Norse sagas, it was the year 1000. The first permanent European settlement of the land, now known as Canada, was established in 1605 at Port Royal in the land the French called Acadia. Colonel Edward Cornwallis founded the city of Halifax in 1749, establishing British control in Nova Scotia. Throughout the 18th century, both England and France had built forts along the coast to enforce their claims to the rich North Atlantic fishing grounds. Looking across the bright waters, three churches on shore command a dramatic view of the charming village of Mahone Bay. There is ample time here to enjoy the view and spend a few hours with a hook and line. The Miramichi River in New Brunswick supplies some of the finest Atlantic salmon fishing in the world. Like most North American rivers, the Miramichi fell on hard times. Pollution and overfishing devastated the spawning salmon. New Brunswick moved so effectively to protect the fish that the Miramichi River is now the most successful Atlantic salmon fishery on the continent. Prince Edward Island floats on the waves of a blue gulf, a green seclusion and haunt of ancient peace. So wrote Lucy Maud Montgomery, author of Anne of Green Gables. Helicopters from Prince Edward Island and the Magdalen Islands airlift wildlife adventurers to the ice floes to see the harp seal nursery. It is one of the premier wildlife experiences in the world. Eastern Canada includes Quebec, Canada's largest province, stretching over 1,200 miles, and Ontario, the most heavily populated, as well as the wealthiest and most industrialized. Commissioned by François Ier of France to find gold in the New World and a northwest passage to Asia, Jacques Cartier sailed up the St. Lawrence River in 1535. Landing at an Iroquois village near the site of what is today Quebec City, he asked the natives what they called this land. They told him Kanata, the Iroquois word for settlement. For the next 100 years, the staple fur traded was beaver, as well as fancy furs such as lynx, Arctic fox, and mink. First observed by Europeans in 1542, Montmorency Falls is a shimmering crystalline wonder. 6 miles outside of Quebec City, the roaring falls plunge 274 feet, more than 1.5 times the height of Niagara Falls. Past and present meet on every corner of old Quebec City. The British commander James Wolfe laid siege to the city after marching the 6 miles from Montmorency to Quebec during the 7 Years' War between England and France. In 1759, French General Montcalm sent soldiers to battle the British on the Plains of Abraham. Wolfe won the Battle of Quebec, and that fateful victory cost France her claims to Canada. Looming high on the rocky cliffs of Cap Diamant is one of the leading landmarks of Quebec, the baronial Château Frontenac. Built by the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1892, the Château Frontenac initiated a tradition of chateau-style hotels that became a uniquely Canadian architectural form. 80% of all Québécois are direct descendants of the French voyageurs and the colonists of New France. And while the nation as a whole has 2 official languages, French and English, French alone is the official language of the province of Quebec. Even the culture and art are unique, different in both approach and technique from the rest of Canada. Undeniably possessing a strong sense of history and an insouciant Gallic charm, Quebec City also comprehends all the nuances of joie de vivre, especially when it includes a rollicking good time. Sometimes described as the frostbite version of Mardi Gras, the Quebec Winter Carnival offers Québécois of all ages a chance to participate in carving elaborate ice sculptures, showing off their skating skills, or simply taking in the spectacle. Jacques Cartier failed to find gold in Canada, but he was the first European to chart the shores and shoals of the St. Lawrence River. He was also the first Frenchman to step ashore on the island of Montreal, where the St. Lawrence and Ottawa rivers flow together, forming one magnificent and mighty river. In 1642, 36 missionaries, hired by the Society of Notre Dame in Paris to convert the natives to Catholicism, founded the city that would become Montreal. The second largest French-speaking city in the world, modern Montreal comes in 2 layers: the contemporary skyscraper skyline on the surface and the subterranean city. Built to escape the harshness of winter, the underground city is completely accessible by the Metro subway system. It provides everything anyone could possibly want: boutiques, bookstores, and restaurants, all without ever having to deal with frozen noses or icy sidewalks. Where winter ice is a fact of life, it only makes sense to make a national sport out of it. Canadian children learn to skate almost as soon as they can walk. And the very next thing they learn is how to play ice hockey. An Iroquois word meaning shining waters. Ontario is the perfect name for a province that sparkles with more than 250,000 lakes and rivers. High above the rapids and falls of the Ottawa River rises the federal capital of Ottawa. The river forms a natural boundary between Ontario and Quebec. In 1857, Queen Victoria herself commissioned the soaring Gothic spires that grace Parliament Hill. The Parliament buildings house the Senate Chamber, the House of Commons, the Speaker's Chamber, and the Parliamentary Library. The country of Canada is a constitutional republic consisting of 10 provinces and 3 territories. Before Ottawa was chosen to be the nation's capital, the Rideau Canal was dug to provide a way to provision the military in case the Americans cut off supplies coming down the river. The Rideau Canal was constructed to defend against an American attack that never occurred. Used exclusively for pleasure craft in the summer, the canal is the world's longest skating rink in the winter. As for those American attacks that never came, the border between Canada and the United States is today the world's longest undefended border. A sacred place of powerful spiritual significance to the native peoples, Niagara Falls bear the name the Adirondack originally gave them. Niagara, thunder of water. That thunder is the sound of 41 million gallons per minute plunging straight down 178 feet. Bright lights, big city. Toronto is Canada's Big Apple, the largest city in Canada, home to more than 3 million. It is the country's financial center, the place to make it big. Toronto supports the arts, theater, ballet, and exclusive shopping boutiques that specialize in panache, charm, and elegance. Toronto also enjoys a rich architectural heritage. When the St. James Cathedral was completed in 1874, the steeple pierced so much farther into the air than anything else in town that sailors used it as a landmark. Today, the CN Tower has overtaken the steeple of St. James by far. It is not only the tallest building in Toronto, but the tallest freestanding structure in the world. At 1,821 feet tall, it stretches more than 1/3 of a mile into Canada's sky. Toronto's architecture is a melange of old and new, influenced by ethnic diversity, for Toronto is a city of neighborhoods. Chinatown, as well as the Greek, Italian, and Polish district, each maintains its own culture. Everyone comes together at the Nathan Phillips Square ice skating rink. Whether skating hand in hand or dancing on ice, it's Toronto's most popular winter meeting place. The many people who have made their home here all contribute to the rich multicultural communities that take Toronto beyond the merely metropolitan and make it truly cosmopolitan. Western Canada has an astonishing range of scenery, from Manitoba's subarctic tundra and Saskatchewan's rich farmlands to Alberta's majestic mountain peaks and British Columbia's coastal forests. No matter how modern and convenient Canada's cities are, at their back is always the haunting wildness of the far north, the kingdom of the ice bear, the land of Nanook of the North. Polar bears are creatures of the far north and the Arctic. They are found nowhere else on Earth. Polar bears hunt seals, but before they can go out onto the ice to stalk their prey, the ice must be solid enough to support their tremendous weight. Adult males can weigh 1,500 pounds, 3/4 of a ton of pure predator. While they wait on the shore for the ice to form, the young bears spar. They learn important lessons in self-defense from wrestling and mock biting. When the time comes to pick a mate, protect a kill, or defend a cub, polar bears fight, sometimes to the death. Many birds breed in the Arctic: eared grebes, seagulls, and Arctic loons. Under the midnight sun, Arctic cotton bursts into bloom, and the Arctic sky soars blue and limitless over the burgeoning life of summer. The golden fields of summer stretch endlessly across the prairies of Saskatchewan. The breadbasket of Canada, Saskatchewan is prime wheat country, the size of Texas, and one of the great wheat-growing regions of the world. But the financial demands of the family farm are changing, and it has become difficult for the new generation of farmers to prosper. In the Little Crimson Manual, it's written plain and clear that who would wear the scarlet coat shall say goodbye to fear, shall be a guardian of the right, a sleuth hound of the trail. In the Little Crimson Manual, there is no such word as fail. Only the Canadian Mounties could possibly inspire such poetry, and so they did in these lines from Robert Service's Clancy of the Mounted Police. But then, no police force in the world possesses as romantic a history as the legendary Royal Canadian Mounted Police. The RCMP began as the Northwest Mounted Police. Their mission? To tame the West. To their eternal credit, they did it wisely and well. During the first years of their existence, the Mounties used negotiation, not force of arms, to enforce the law on the vast frontier. On the east side of the Continental Divide, high in the Canadian Rockies, lies one of Alberta's natural jewels, Banff National Park. Canada's first national park, Banff is also the most popular. It adjoins Jasper, Kootenay, and Yoho National Parks, the four together forming the largest mountain parkland in the world. 3 different ecosystems within the parks range from Arctic to forest to prairie, and all support a rich population of animals. Chateau Lake Louise in Banff National Park is another example of the luxurious Canadian chateau style. In the summer, the waters of Lake Louise shimmer emerald green. Mountain trails wind upward to alpine meadows, where deer graze silently on wildflowers. The quintessential western city, Calgary, sits at the point where the long prairies meet the tall mountains. Calgary can legitimately claim to having been present at the birth of the Northwest Mounted Police. In large part, the force was founded to put the moonshiners out of business at rowdy Fort Whoop-Up, not far from Calgary. Cattle ranching and the Alberta oil fields brought prosperity to the growing city. Skyscrapers and architecturally innovative buildings such as the Saddle Dome define Calgary's distinctive skyline. Not far from Calgary, at Dinosaur Provincial Park in the Drumheller Badlands, thousands of dinosaur fossils have been excavated. More than 50 complete dinosaur skeletons found in the Badlands have been reconstructed at the Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology, the largest collection of complete skeletons in the world. Without railways, there would be and could be no Canada. The first transcontinental train left Montreal on the 28th of June, 1886, and arrived in British Columbia 6 days later. Snaking through half a dozen mountain ranges between Banff and Vancouver, the Rocky Mountaineer winds its way through some of the most scenic mountain passes in the Rockies. The Rocky Mountaineer is quite simply one of the world's spectacular train rides. West of the Rockies lies one of the most exciting cities in Canada, Vancouver. Crowds come out at night to sample the fun and temptation of its nightlife. But the lights of the night give way to sunrise as the morning warmth blankets the mountains surrounding the city. Vancouver probably has the mildest climate in all of Canada, thanks to the influence of the Japanese Current, a submarine river of warm water that flows just offshore. That may help explain why Vancouver is the largest city in British Columbia and the third largest in Canada. On the other hand, it may be the setting. Poised at the edge of the Pacific with forested mountains in the background, the city takes full advantage of all its possibilities. On Vancouver's western edge, along the Pacific, lies the University of British Columbia Museum of Anthropology. It houses one of the finest collections of Northwest Coast native art to be found anywhere. On the grounds of the museum are reconstructions of native Northwest Coast longhouses. The coastal tribes were prosperous, living comfortably in huge post and beam cedar homes. Tall totem poles stood outside, telling the family's history. That certain pride in its ethnicity has given Vancouver a multicultural atmosphere. The Chinese arrived in this area in 1858. The attraction was the Fraser River Gold Rush, and all who came hoped to strike it rich. A short ferry ride away from the city of Vancouver is Vancouver Island. The island is named for George Vancouver, the English navigator who charted much of the continent's northwest coast. Vancouver Island is a microcosm of all of Canada. It has an exquisitely civilized city, Victoria. And in the interior, splendid wilderness. A challenging sea kayak trip north to the Queen Charlotte Islands is like taking a journey back in time. The Haida village at Tanu has the largest collection of totem poles in Canada in their original location. The Haida who settled this wild coast left behind these towering sentinels to haunt the peace of this silent wilderness. The Yukon Territory was opened up by the gold seekers of the Klondike Gold Rush in the 19th century. Adjoining the Yukon, the Northwest Territories. Nunavut extends to within 500 miles of the North Pole and includes the islands of the Arctic archipelago, among them Ellesmere and Baffin Islands. Located on the north arm of Great Slave Lake, amid the jagged rocks of the Precambrian Shield, Yellowknife is the capital and the only city in the Northwest Territories. Gold was discovered in 1896 by miners on their way to the Klondike. But the gold rush didn't get underway in the Northwest Territories until 1934. Today, Subsistence fishing keeps the native people of the Northwest Territories living in close touch with nature and their tribal traditions. Surrounded by the icy Arctic waters, Baffin Island is the largest island in Canada and fifth largest in the world. The Arctic tundra, often called the Barren Ground and considered a wasteland, is in fact rich in wildlife during the brief Arctic summer. Migratory birds, especially seabirds, come to breed. In the winter, beluga whales and walrus come to feed in the abundant waters off the coast. Named for the Yukon River that flows in a sinuous curve westward through Alaska to the Bering Sea, the Yukon Territory may be Canada's most romantic frontier. The name is derived from the native word Yukon-a, meaning Great River. The river's valley was the great highway that led the first peoples from Asia into the unknown interior of the North American continent. Knowledge of the bush was also essential to the early miners when gold was discovered at Bonanza Creek in 1896 by George Washington Carmack, Tagish Charlie, and Skookum Jim. The Klondike Gold Rush exploded on the continental consciousness in huge front-page headlines. Ton of gold. More than 100,000 eager gold miners with a bad case of Klondike fever swarmed into the Yukon. Chichakos, newcomers, seasoned into sourdoughs, old-timers, as they slogged hundreds of miles across rugged, trackless terrain to stake their claim to a lifetime of riches. In the first 7 years, $100 million in gold was taken out of creek gravel in the Yukon. Originally a provisioning point for prospectors trudging north to the gold fields, Dawson City was built where the Klondike and Yukon rivers meet. Eventually, Dawson's river ports were superseded by the Alaska Highway into Whitehorse, the new capital of the territory. In 1973, the Yukon natives began negotiating a comprehensive land claim settlement with the federal government. 15 years later, the tribes were awarded 16,000 square miles and $232 million for the lands they gave up. Under such settlements, the traditional culture, dance, and way of life of the native tribes can thrive once again. This agreement and others like it assure the First Peoples of Canada a strong voice in the uses of the land, a powerful hope for their own future. Canada may be the last industrialized nation on Earth whose heritage of vast tracts of untamed wilderness remains largely intact. Polar bears roam the Arctic, eagles claim the sky, and bears share the western highlands with mountain goats. A country of coasts, Canada's 3 seas are alive with fascinating creatures, some found nowhere else on Earth. Canada wears a dazzling necklace of cities strung along her southern border, pulsing with life. Engaged in the hustle and bustle of this century, at their backs is always the vastness beyond, untouched, untrammeled, untrod. That trackless frontier, that splendid expanse, challenges the hearts, the minds, and the souls of all Canadians as they wrestle with justice to determine the rights of the Indigenous peoples, the fate of their wildlife, and the destiny of the land itself.